So I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer in the UK in 2014, and that really sort of opened my eyes to a whole new lifestyle. I came here to study my master's in fashion history, and then I became very interested in health and nutrition after my cancer diagnosis.
So my name is Isabelle Benard, and I'm a GP. And initially I was, I started changing my diet when my children came home from school one day and said, we've had all these courses on the environment, and we really feel that we should be doing something for the environment, and we'd like to stop eating meat. So that was the first time that I kind of looked into vegetarianism. And because we thought actually it's a really good idea, so we started looking into it, and I thought I'm very happy with that. It was more from an ethical point of view as well. We thought we'd like to eat kind of cruelty-free, and so we began cutting out meat from our diet, and gradually we cut out fish as well. So it was just a gradual thing. After a while, we just didn't want to have dairy after a while, because we also looked into the dairy industry and thought, actually, this is just dreadful, and we don't want to be part of that at all. So we actually just transitioned quite slowly from sort of omnivores to vegetarians, and then slowly we actually became vegan, which was definitely not the plan initially. And so as a doctor, I thought, well, I really need to look into this as well in terms of health, because I wanted to make sure that we weren't doing anything that would make us ill. Because, you know, generally speaking, when people hear of a vegan diet or a plant-based diet, they think, oh my gosh, you're going to be lacking in everything. So, you know, as a doctor, I thought I really want to look into this. And it's really when I started reading up about plant-based diets that I realized the health benefits were immense. And it really was a paradigm shift for me as a doctor, realizing that a lot of the diseases that I was treating on a daily basis were actually caused by our poor diets, and how actually transitioning or making sure that you have a predominantly plant-based diet can actually help you with so many health conditions. And it really enthused me even more about being plant-based and trying to pass that on to my patients, because I suddenly felt I've been treating patients for diseases because that's what I've been taught to do. We're taught how to recognize diseases, and once you've recognized them, you treat them. But at no point do you think, oh my God, why is this thing coming up in the first place? So, hypertension, obesity, of course we look at diet, but we never really look at that aspect of things. To how type 2 diabetes can be like reversed and things. It was just only about tablets and medicines. And it really, really changed the way I work, the way I practice, and the way I see, patients and diseases, and trying to actually get to the source of things. So it was a progressive thing. I didn't go from like omnivore to plant-based and suddenly everything changed. It was a bit of a gradual thing. And it's by educating myself really about nutrition and realizing that I knew very little about nutrition because during medical school we have very little that's in our studies about nutrition. It's very, very short. I'm hoping this will change with time, really, because literally knowing that you can change a disease process by changing the way you eat is, for me, it was completely life-changing as a doctor.
So I transitioned toward a plant-based diet because I met a nutritionist and I'm suffering from IBS, and she told me to start to eliminate all dairy products, which I did. And I realized that was really a bad trigger for my IBS. And then I started to follow vegan people on Instagram, and what they were saying all makes sense. You cannot call yourself an animal lover and still eat them. And at the moment, the industry is so bad for the animal, and I don't want to be part of it.
We know that weight loss is generally something that we see when people transition to a whole food plant-based diet, and that helps with anything that's in relation to that, and that causes insulin resistance and inflammation. So anything that you can do to increase and enhance your plant foods will eventually help with this. And the same with cancers. So certain types of cancers, we know that people who've had cancers in the past will actually live longer when they transition to a plant-based diet. So it's also a health promotion tool that you can even use afterwards, if you like. If people have had breast cancer, we know that cutting out dairy and removing meat will actually improve the survival. When you eat and you consume whole foods, which are unprocessed or as minimally processed as possible, and coming from plants, you will actually have all the nutrition that you need to stay healthy. Proteins are present in many of these foods. The pulses, the lentils, the chickpeas and the beans are particularly high in protein, but so are nuts and seeds. And you have proteins in most vegetables, and whole grain foods are a high source of protein as well. So actually it's very easy to have enough protein. It's not the protein that's the problem. And those proteins which are plant-based are much better for our metabolism. We are actually primed to eat mostly plants. That's how our bodies work. And so it's actually much easier on our kidneys, for instance, if we have plant proteins than if we have a lot of animal protein. So we're actually absolutely fine. The only thing that can and must be taken if you're on a fully whole food plant-based diet is vitamin B12, because that is actually lacking from plant foods. It won't be anywhere, and it's essential to stay healthy. You do need vitamin B12. Most omnivores will get their B12 from meat and dairy products, because the animals are given B12 injections. So you actually take the B12 from the food, but it's not a natural source of food, if you like. It's actually been injected to the cows. But as you remove the milk and the dairy and the meat, you will actually lack in B12. So taking a B12 supplement is essential if you transition to a plant-based diet, and it's a very simple thing to do.
So my name's Dr. Rosie Green, and I am an Associate Professor in Sustainability, Nutrition and Health at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And what I do in my day-to-day work essentially is I research the impacts on people's health and on the planet of different dietary choices and different ways of organising our food systems. I think our diets have changed a lot in the last 100 years or so. Meat used to be more of a treat for a lot of families. You would have maybe a Sunday roast where you would roast a chicken or a joint of meat, and then you would use all of that meat for the rest of the week in different dishes. So every bit of that animal would be really used to its fullest. And it wasn't so much a case of just having meat without even thinking about it. Now we're much more likely to buy a chicken sandwich just as a default, and we don't even really realise that there's chicken in it, because it's just a sort of packaged food that we eat. But it's still meat, and it's not even particularly nice quality or good tasting meat. So I think that's one of the big things that's changed, is our attitude towards the way we eat animal foods in particular has it's just become much less thoughtful in the way we do these things. And then of course, our general consumption of packaged and processed foods has gone through the roof. We cook much less because we have less time, and so we buy things in a packaged fully produced way rather than making them from scratch, and that has implications obviously for waste, for plastic waste, for us not really knowing or understanding what is in our food. It's got a lot of consequences, I think, for weight management and a lot of different things to do with the ways we eat. So I think there have been huge changes, but I think things are starting to change again now. I think people are reacting against that in some sections of society, and they are thinking that they want to eat more whole foods and they want to eat less animal products, and there is a move back in the other direction slightly, I think.
I think vegan can be anything that doesn't contain animal products. And that can be things like chips and Oreos and Coke. This is all vegan because it has no animal products. But I think what we're talking about here is mainly plant-based diets, which means that predominantly you eat plants, and that is fruit, vegetables, legumes and pulses like chickpeas, lentils, beans and peas, and nuts and seeds, and whole grains. So that's what constitutes what we call a whole food plant-based diet, and that is a diet that is probably the healthiest and the most health-promoting diet around. If you have a predominantly plant-based diet, you can actually prevent a lot of what we call lifestyle diseases.
So I think one thing it's important to think about is the fact that for a country like the UK, not only are our diets having a major negative impact on the environment at the moment, but we know that they're not healthy. So in the UK, we have dietary guidelines that tell us what we should be eating, and virtually nobody is actually eating according to those guidelines. I think the last time we did some research on this, we found that 1 in 1,000 people in the UK actually meets all of the dietary guidelines that the government has set out to say that we should be eating. So we've got a problem there, definitely. We've got two problems. One is that our diets are having a terrible impact on the environment, and the other is that they're having a terrible impact on us as well.
And I often work with clients that want to transition to more plant-based. So I would say, take it slow, be kind to yourself, and really focus in on those unprocessed foods. Because the processed foods out there, they're really big in London, as you know, the vegan burgers, the vegan nights are full of these processed foods. And while they're good once in a blue moon, you really shouldn't be having them every day because they're high in oils, they're high in those seed oils that are incredibly toxic, they're high in salt, they're high in fat and sugars, and they're lacking in nutrition. So I always encourage people to aim for those whole foods, like your vegetables, your legumes, which are high in fiber, so good for the gut, your low glycemic grains even, as well as your vegetable, your fruit and your spices and things like that. And also work with a coach, work with a practitioner that can help guide you.
If your diet to start with is very low in plant foods, then suddenly transition to a very high ratio of plants will suddenly bring this huge amount of fiber to your gut. Now, fiber is essential for life, and actually we don't digest fiber, but our bacteria which live in our gut, that they're the ones who will digest the fiber for us. And in doing that, they actually produce all these wonderful byproducts, which keep us healthy. So it's very important that we have fiber for them. And the fiber only comes from plants. So there's no fiber in meat, eggs, and dairy. You'll only find the fibers in plant foods. But if you transition from very low fiber to very, very high fiber, then all the bugs in your bowel will kind of make a feast of all that fiber, and that can cause a lot of gas. When we're looking at certain types of diseases, like the ones we've mentioned prior, we know that anything you can do to kind of increase the amount of plant foods in your diet, and that could be a gradual progressive thing or an overnight thing if you're very motivated, will promote health. And some of these diseases can even be reversed. So we know that people with high blood pressure who take medicines and tablets and who are overweight, if we transition them to a more predominantly plant-based diet, we can see their weight going down, and subsequently we see their blood pressures going down, and we can eventually reduce the medicines and sometimes stop them. So certain diseases I would really strongly advocate for a plant-based diet. We're looking at things like anything related to obesity, because we know that weight loss is generally something that we see when people transition to a whole food plant-based diet, and that helps with anything that's in relation to that, and that causes insulin resistance and inflammation.
So today we are Made in Hackney, and the cookery classes are part of the community program. So the community program was set up in 2012 when Made in Hackney was opened. The classes are open to everybody, and the community classes are free. But however, if participants they want to make a donation, they're free to do that. And also we have master classes, and we have classes for special occasions, and also for plant-based food is really, really convenient. As years have gone by, there has been a dramatic increase in availability of plant-based foods. So everywhere you go, like supermarket, restaurants, schools as well. There's a lot of availability of plant-based foods nowadays. It's very convenient. So plant-based food is often perceived as exclusive, elite, and expensive, and it can be all those things if that's the crowd that you're aiming for. But if you look at plant-based foods, the vegetables, the spices, if you buy them in bulk and cook them from scratch, in reality it's not that expensive at all. Things like rice, flour, lentils, in fact, they don't need refrigeration, so you are also saving on energy costs. And furthermore, like during the months of September, like there are harvests, like apple harvests and pear harvests. So if some people in the garden, they have excess stock, if they give it away for free, then your plant-based food is also for free as well, and you're making friends with your neighbors, so it's a win-win. So seitan is a really popular ingredient that is used to make mock meats, and that's a really good substitute because it absorbs a lot of flavor. Another good substitute to use is firm tofu, and that can be used to imitate mincemeat and tofu steaks, and also mock fish as well. And there are other vegetables like jackfruit and mushrooms. Even they can be used for making either mock pork, like mince, like shredded pork or shredded chicken as well. So it really, just have fun, play around with your vegetables and lentils, and you won't even miss meat in the end.
I think like cooking because I'm Chinese, I cook a lot of Chinese food, so it's just good to like do something else, which I don't really do at home. But also like you don't have ingredients at home. It's very good.
And it's a community feel, isn't it?
It is. Like, you don't see like so many different people.
But with anything that's pulpy, watery, add salt right at the end.
Good food eating. I would say a lot of American foods.
Yeah.
But also, yeah, I think, my mom used to make a big pot of pinto beans, which is obviously plant-based, so I grew up eating a lot of that. I used to have, as a latchkey kid, I'd come home and just have tortillas with avocado, and that was my little snack. So, it's pretty much part of my heritage. So, and it's hard to really get, the spices, so this was why I was, it just conjured up, California's food.
You already put it in.
Is this your first time at the centre?
I'm a regular customer.
So here I have the mustard.
So I think there is a big link between the way we eat and the way that we can sustain the planet. Obviously there's a huge historical link between the way we've developed as a species and the way that we've evolved to grow our food. So the planet could not sustain as many people as it does now, nowhere near, if we hadn't evolved to sort of tame the landscape and to produce food in a way that we can feed all of those people. So agriculture has been incredibly beneficial for the evolution of the human species, and that includes keeping livestock, it includes growing crops, it includes genetically modifying crops, all of these things that we've done for thousands of years. They have been incredibly beneficial to us, but at the same time they are now having an impact on the planet that is beyond what it can sustain. And so we need to really radically rethink what we're doing in terms of our diets becoming sustainable. And there are lots of different ways that we can do that. I think, lots of people are adopting different types of diets. So people are becoming vegan, or people are becoming flexitarian, where they eat low amounts of meat and dairy and other animal products. Some people are pescatarian, some people are vegetarian, and I think there's room for lots of different ways to eat that can have much less impact on the planet than our average diets do at the moment in a country like the UK. So there can be lots of different pathways, I think, to a sustainable type of diet, but we do all really need to think about what we're doing and where our food is coming from, and we need to think about it much more seriously in order to make those changes so that we can stop having such a negative impact on the world around us, because that's going to have an impact on us too. Yeah, so the link between air pollution and agriculture is one that I don't think has been talked about so much. We hear a lot about the impact of livestock, particularly, and eating meat and dairy on greenhouse gas emissions, but not so much about air pollution. But agriculture is also actually a major source of air pollution in a lot of countries around the world, and that includes the UK. So we know that particular agricultural processes, and that includes keeping livestock, and it also includes growing crops in some ways, can be very polluting to both to the air and to the water and the soil. And one of the reasons for that is that we add a lot of nitrogen to our food in order to make sure that the soil can remain productive. So we're putting in a lot of nitrogen, which is then released as pollution. And also when we're keeping livestock to feed ourselves, there's also pollution of ammonia that's released by those livestock in their waste, and that becomes a major source of air pollution. So it's not only for people living near farms or places where animals are raised, but also the air pollution has impacts on everyone across the country. And that's not something that I think has been widely discussed, and it is another opportunity to get further benefits for health to humans out of changing our diets, because obviously if we can reduce air pollution, not only would we be improving our diets by eating more healthily, but we could also be reducing deaths from other causes as well. I think there's a really complicated relationship between the way we produce our food in different countries around the world and the impacts on the environment. So in a country like the UK, we import a lot of our food. We don't actually grow enough to feed ourselves. We haven't for a really, really long time. So in many cases, we're actually importing food that is grown in countries that are very vulnerable to climate change. And that's potentially not great for those countries, and it's potentially not great for us either. So that's a major issue in terms of the global food system, that we could be producing more food in the UK to feed ourselves, but we're not, because we're using our land for other things. And the countries that we rely on to produce that food, they might have real trouble coming in the form of climate change and other shocks, and they might not be able to sustain that production in the future, either for their own populations or for us. But then there's another issue where our diets in countries like the UK have an impact on other countries as well, because we're eating a lot of meat and dairy in the UK at the moment. We're eating much more than is recommended for our health, and more than is recommended for environmental, from an environmental perspective as well. And so that has an impact on climate change around the world. It makes it more likely that other countries are going to experience extreme climate events. In the UK, we're very lucky that climate change hasn't hit us in such a devastating way yet as it has other countries. But our choices in countries like the UK have an impact on those other countries. And that's where some of the really devastating consequences are already being felt. So any changes that we can make to our diets can help to make the increased likelihood of climate disasters less for other countries. And also, I think it shows leadership if countries like the UK, where our diets are so much worse, can say, actually, we're going to try and change things. And this is the direction that we think that people need to be going in the future. I think that's really important, that we can hold our hands up and say, look, this is not healthy for us, it's not healthy for the world. We can find a way to being better and healthier, and we can show other countries how to do that. I think for a very wealthy country like the UK to do that, I think that's quite important. So I think the nitrogen cycle is important for us to understand when we think about changing the way that we eat. And it's complicated because we need nitrogen in our food, that to produce our food, that's really important. But what we're doing at the moment is we're adding a lot of extra nitrogen in the production of our food, and then it's being released as pollution, and that is damaging in terms of climate change. It's damaging in terms of it's polluting our waterways through runoff of nitrogen, it's polluting our air through ammonia, and it's really degrading our soil. So there are huge problems at the moment with the nitrogen cycle where it's really out of balance. And that's going to be quite difficult to fix. I think there are a few things we can do to help with that. One is to reduce the amount of livestock that we're keeping. I don't think necessarily that I see a future without livestock in the world. I think they do many good things in the world, particularly in other countries. But at the moment, we're putting a huge amount of energy into growing food for livestock and then raising those livestock. And they're producing a lot of nitrogen pollution. So that's one area where the cycle is out of balance at the moment. Another thing that we are going to have to do is to reduce our reliance on fertiliser, and that's going to be a big problem as well, because when you start to encourage people to eat more plant-based diets, a lot of those plant-based diets are made possible by using huge amounts of nitrogen fertiliser. And again, that's not really sustainable because it's degrading the soil, and then in the future we're not going to be able to grow as much food. So I think we need to move much more back towards practices such as regenerative agriculture, where we manage to have a nitrogen cycle that's more in keeping with the way things naturally are, so we're putting less artificial inputs into the soil, and we are trying to move towards a better balance really with nitrogen, and that's going to involve us eating differently and also producing our food differently. So we have quite a long way to go on that as well, I think.
More energy, you might sleep better, you might feel a little bit more mentally sharp, less tired. You might find that your skin is better, or that you'll lose a bit of weight if you're in excess weight. If you're normal weight, you're unlikely to lose weight. You'll just stay your same weight, but you might just feel absolutely better in yourself, and that will motivate you to carry on. In our studies about nutrition, it's very, very short. I'm hoping this will change with time, really, because literally knowing that you can change a disease process by changing the way you eat is, for me, it was completely life-changing as a doctor. Of course, as a person, wanting to stay healthy was primarily what we all want, really, is we want to stay healthy for as long as possible, and that's definitely the aim. So that's my story, really, and it was all brought by my children. So it was really wonderful how the younger population is actually changing things a lot in terms of environment, sustainability, which I think is so important nowadays, with everything with global warming and everything else. I think the way we eat can have a big impact both on the planet and our own personal health.
We are all connected. What is no good for you is no good for the animal, is no good for the earth. That's it. We need to understand that, and we need to respect that. We are not above, we are just all together in the same planet. And the scientists say, if human race disappear, animal won't disappear. But if animals disappear, we will disappear. Because bees, for example, are so important for the production of vegetable and fruit. Whales are very important for the oxygen. They produce more oxygen than 300 trees. So behind each animal, there is a reason why they're there. And nature is dealing with that.